Sorry, I'm late. She arrived at the blind date carrying a sleeping child, and changed everything that night. Daniel got there early. This is important. He got there early because he is the kind of man who gets places early. Not because he is eager, but because being late makes him feel like he is losing a game nobody else knows they are playing. He had timed the drive. He had also timed the walk from the parking garage to the restaurant door, which took 4 minutes even though the garage was only 1 block away, because he stopped twice to check his phone and once to look at his reflection in a dark shop window and tell himself everything looked fine. Everything looked fine. The restaurant was warm, not in the nice way, in the way of too many people crammed into a space that wasn't quite big enough, where the candles on the tables were doing more work than they were supposed to, and the noise from the open kitchen kept spiking over the low music every few minutes like someone was conducting an argument. Daniel had picked this place because Reshma, the friend who had set this whole thing up, said it was charming and intimate, and he had learned by now that both of those words are just polite ways of saying small. He sat at the corner booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door. This is also important. A man who sits with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door is either a person with very bad history or a very lonely one. With Daniel, it was a bit of both, pressed together over 35 years into something that looked like calm from the outside and felt like low-grade static from the inside. He ordered water. He did not order a drink because he wanted to be sharp, not for the date exactly, more because he had made enough blurry decisions in the past and had a policy now. He also did not open his phone because he had read somewhere that people who sit alone in restaurants staring at their phones look desperate, and he was not desperate. He was not desperate. He checked his watch. 7:23. The reservation was for 7. He had been there since 6:51. She was 23 minutes late, which put the total gap between his arrival and hers at 32 minutes, which he was absolutely not calculating. The waiter came by a second time with a look on his face that Daniel had seen before, that particular blend of sympathy and mild entertainment that service industry people develop for people who sit alone past their reservation time. Daniel asked for a bread basket. The waiter brought it without comment. Daniel ate one piece and then felt bad about it and put the basket to the far edge of the table, as though that would erase what he had done. 7:27. He was working through the math of how long a polite person waits before leaving. 15 more minutes? 10, when the door opened, and the math stopped. 2, she was not what he had expected. Nobody is what you expect when they walk in through a restaurant door, carrying a sleeping 4-year-old pressed against their shoulder like a comma mid-sentence. The child, a boy, small, in a striped shirt that had not survived the day with dignity, was entirely limp, in that specific way children go limp when they have crossed from awake into deeply asleep, like all the bones have quietly resigned. His head was on her shoulder. One shoe was on, one was not. She walked in and found Daniel's table the way people find tables when they already know which one it is. Without hesitating, without scanning the room with that slow, desperate look of someone waiting to be recognized. She just walked. The boy did not stir. She had dark eyes and hair that was pulled back in the kind of way that starts as something neat and ends as something real. She was wearing a coat that she had clearly put on in a hurry, one collar tucked wrong, the belt not quite threaded through the loop on the left side. She looked like someone who had left the house making 3 decisions at once and had gotten all 3 mostly right. She stopped at the table. "Sorry I'm late." No apology in her voice, just the flat arithmetic of a life run on contingencies, the same tone you use when you tell someone it rained on your way over. Factual, unfixable, already behind them. The sitter canceled at 6:30. She said it before she sat down, before hello, before anything. Then she laid the boy across the booth seat opposite Daniel with a precision that could only come from practice. The kind that gets built up in parking lots and hospital waiting rooms and other people's living rooms, the geometry of fitting a small unconscious human being into a space not designed for them. She smoothed his hair once. Her hand moved across his head, the way you touch something you would do anything for, and are too tired to say so out loud. Then she sat down. She picked up the menu. She looked at Daniel like she was daring him to say something about it. He did not say something about it. He said, "What do you usually order here?" Something moved through her face. Not a smile exactly, a recalibration, like she had come ready for a different conversation and had to set down the one she was prepared for and pick up this one instead. "I've never been here before," she said. "Neither have I." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the menu. "Then we're both guessing," she said. "Story of my life," Daniel said. This time it was a smile. Small. The kind that gets rationed. 3. Her name was Nadia. She told him this after they had ordered, she the pasta, he the fish, both of them landing on the cheaper side of the menu, the way adults do when they do not want to make the other person feel obligated. She was 32. She worked at a non-profit that did housing advocacy, which meant she spent most of her days making calls that nobody returned and writing grant applications for money that mostly went somewhere else. She said this without bitterness. It was just the shape her days had taken, the way certain clothes take the shape of the person wearing them over time. The boy was Theo. Theo was 4. Theo liked trucks, hated the texture of cheese even though he liked the taste of it, and had recently entered a phase where he believed he was capable of negotiating the terms of his bedtime the way heads of state negotiate treaties, with great seriousness and completely without leverage. She said this with the tiredness of someone who loses those negotiations more often than they should. "Does he do this often?" Daniel asked. "Sleep in restaurants?" "He does it in the car, and then I have to carry him out, and once he's in my arms he does not come back." She glanced at him over the booth seat. "Tonight he made it to the restaurant door before he went under. So, progress." Daniel looked at the boy. He was breathing slow. His one shoe, a small sneaker with a Velcro strap, sat at a slight angle on his foot, like it was having its own quiet conversation with gravity. "He lose the other shoe in the car?" Nadia looked at Theo's feet. "Oh no." She pressed her eyes closed for exactly 1 second. "It's in the parking lot. I can go get it." "You don't have to." "Which lot?" She looked at him. The look was brief and specific, the look of someone running a fast calculation. "The one on Clement. Blue Honda." "It'll be on the passenger side." He was back in 6 minutes with a small sneaker that had a cartoon of a dump truck on the side and a Velcro strap that was so worn it was starting to give up. He put it on the table next to the bread basket. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Thank you," she said. And the way she said it, quiet, without performance, was the kind of thank you that means more than the thing being thanked for. 4. The date ran on 2 tracks at once. On the surface, a normal first date, tentative questions, the edited versions of themselves they were both carrying in, pressed flat for portability. They talked about work, hers in loops of frustration and commitment, his in the careful sentences of someone who likes what he does but has learned that saying so too plainly makes people suspicious. He was an engineer at a water infrastructure firm, which sounds dry until you explain it, and he had learned to not explain it unless asked. She asked. He told her about aquifer depletion in agricultural zones. He expected her eyes to glaze. They did not glaze. She asked 3 more questions, each better than the last, and at one point said, "That's actually terrifying," in a way that made him feel, strangely, like he had been seen. Beneath all of that, Daniel was doing math he hadn't come here to do. He watched her cut her food without looking at her plate because she was watching Theo. He watched her track every server who walked within 3 feet of the booth. Not in a paranoid way, but the way a person tracks weather, registering information they might need to act on. He watched her hold 2 conversations at once. The one she was having with him, and the one she was having with the space around her sleeping child, constant and silent and completely without drama. He had never seen anyone hold 2 things at once, without showing the seams. His mother used to say that you learn who someone is by watching what they do when they think nobody is watching. He had always thought that was a little romantic, a little soft as a theory, but he was watching Nadia check on Theo every 8 minutes, not anxiously, not hovering, just the way you check a pilot light, and he could not stop. "You're staring at him," she said. "I'm not," he was. "I'm just." He hasn't moved at all. He really commits to sleeping. He clearly gets that from someone. She looked up. "What does that mean?" You committed to driving here, at 7 p.m., with him, after the sitter canceled. He paused. That's commitment. She was quiet for a moment. She was turning her fork in her hand, looking at the middle distance. I almost didn't come, she said. I know. You don't know. You said it when you walked in. I'm sorry I'm late. The sitter canceled at 6:30. He picked up his water glass. That was you explaining why you almost didn't come. You almost talked yourself out of it and then you came anyway. She looked at him across the table. It was the second time she had looked at him like that. The calibration look. The one that said she had come expecting a different kind of person and was still deciding what to do with this one. Reshma said you were quiet, she said. I am quiet. You've talked a lot. That's different. He set his glass down. I don't talk much, but when something's actually true, I say it. She was quiet again. Then, what else do you think is true? I think you came here because you needed one thing tonight that was just for you. And I think Theo being here is making it hard to have that. The word landed somewhere. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Theo. He was breathing slow and even, his small chest rising and falling under the striped shirt that had seen better days. He's never not with me, she said finally. So I don't know anymore what for me even means. A pause. That probably sounds terrible. It sounds true, Daniel said. 5. The moment that could not be unfelt came at 8:17. Daniel was mid-sentence. Something about a reservoir project in the Central Valley, some problem with the soil filtration that his team had been losing sleep over, and he had started talking because she had asked, and because talking about work was the one place where he forgot to be careful. He was gesturing with his hands. He always gestures with his hands when he talks about things that matter, which is another thing he has been told is surprising coming from a quiet man. And he was getting to the part about the soil. And then Theo stirred, not awake, somewhere between, the half-life state of a child at the edge of a dream, where the body does things the mind has not approved. He reached up without opening his eyes. His hand moved through the air, small and uncertain, searching, and found Nadia's wrist. His fingers closed around it. 4 small fingers and a thumb, closing on her wrist the way you close your hand around something you are afraid of losing in the dark. Nadia did not look down. She did not pause the sentence she was starting to respond with. She did not make a sound. Her hand simply turned, the smallest possible motion, less than an inch, the kind of movement you'd miss if you blinked, and her fingers were through his, like she had done it 1,000 times. Because she had done it 1,000 times. Daniel stopped hearing what she was saying. He was watching something he had no word for. Not tenderness exactly. Tenderness is too soft a word, too flowery, the kind of word you find on greeting cards. This was something older. The kind of reflex that does not need the brain's permission. The kind of knowing that lives below thought. She was holding her child's hand in a restaurant booth at 8:17 on a Tuesday, and she did not even know she was doing it. That was the thing. She did not know she was doing it. And Daniel sat across the table from this woman he had known for an hour and felt something shift somewhere behind his sternum. Quiet, tectonic, the kind of shift you only notice after, when you are trying to remember what it felt like before. He looked at the breadbasket, then he looked back at her. You were saying something about the soil, she said. She was looking at him. Her fingers were still through Theo's. She had not moved her hand. The filtration problem. He had completely forgotten about the soil. Right, he said. The soil. He talked about the soil for another 3 minutes and did not retain a single word he said. 6. He asked the wrong question at 8:41. This is also important. He asked it the way men sometimes ask questions, without checking what is behind the door first, in that breezy way that means you do not know there is a door there at all. He had been careful all evening. He had been paying attention. And then he relaxed too much, the way you sometimes do right at the point when a conversation starts to feel safe, and he said, "Does his dad ever take him?" The air changed. Not dramatically, not in the way of movies, where someone slams a glass down or goes very still in a pointed way. The air just changed temperature by a degree. Nadia's face went neutral, in the specific way a face goes neutral when the wound is so old it does not need defending anymore. The scar tissue has thickened over it, smooth and permanent. She did not flinch. She did not bristle. She just set down the thread of the conversation the way you set down a thing you did not ask to be handed. "No," she said. "Just that. One word with walls around it. Do not knock on the walls." Daniel sat with what he'd done for 3 full seconds. He counted. Not literally, but 3 seconds is a real unit of time in moments like this. Enough time to feel the weight of a mistake without drowning in it. He could apologize. He could ask something else and pretend he hadn't asked that. He could pivot with the practiced ease of a man who has learned to steer away from the hard thing. He didn't do any of those things. He looked at her. He looked at Theo, asleep in the booth, holding his mother's wrist with 4 small fingers even in his sleep. "That must have made you very good at this," he said. Not sorry, not correcting, not filling the silence with something soft. Just an observation. From the evidence in front of him, Nadia looked at him. It was different from the other times she had looked at him. The calibration was gone. This was just looking. Direct, steady, with no particular expression that he could name but one he felt somewhere he did not have a word for either. "Reshma didn't tell me you were like this," she said. "I'm not anything," he said. "I just said what was true. That's what I mean." The waiter appeared to ask if they wanted dessert. They both said no at the same time and then looked at each other across the table, and it was a different kind of no. Not the no of 2 people who are ready to leave, but the no of 2 people who do not want to be interrupted. The waiter read the room and left. 7. She told him one thing about herself that she had not planned to tell him. Not the whole story. She had learned long ago that the whole story is not something you hand someone over dinner at a restaurant. The whole story has weight. You do not give weight to someone who is not yet ready to carry it, because then you are not trusting them. You are testing them, and that is different, and the difference matters. She gave him one sentence, compressed. The kind of sentence that is the surface of something much deeper, the way a lake has a surface, and the surface is not the lake. She said, "I used to be the kind of person who waited for other people to make things okay, and then I wasn't, and Theo is a lot of the reason why." She said it looking at the table. Daniel did not ask what it meant. He did not pull at the thread. He did not say, "I understand," or "I've been there," or any of the things people say that are really just about making themselves more comfortable inside someone else's hard thing. He just held it, the way you hold a thing someone has handed you to carry for a moment. "Theo's lucky," he said. Just that. Nothing added to it. She looked up. "I don't know if I'm—" "He is," Daniel said, and the conversation moved on, the way conversations do, when the important thing has been said, and both people know it, and neither one is going to make the mistake of circling back to pick it apart. 8. Theo woke up at 9:03. He did it the way some children wake, not gradually, not in stages, but all at once, like a light switch. One moment asleep, the next sitting up with complete alertness and a look on his face like he had simply chosen to be awake now, having finished his previous task. He looked at his mother. He looked at Daniel. He looked at Daniel for a long time with the frank, unfiltered gaze of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned that staring is considered impolite. He took in Daniel's face with the same thoroughness a building inspector takes in a foundation, looking for load-bearing problems. Then he said, "You have a big nose." Nadia closed her eyes. Daniel laughed so hard the table shook. The couple at the next table looked over. Theo looked at the couple. Then he looked back at Daniel with the expression of a person whose assessment has been confirmed as accurate. "Theo," Nadia said. Her eyes were still closed. "I do have a big nose," Daniel said. "I know," said Theo. "Theo," Nadia said again. Eyes open now. That specific maternal tone that is somehow both a name and an entire essay. "It's a nice nose," Theo said, in the tone of someone being generous. "Thank you," Daniel said seriously. "I've had it a long time." Theo considered this. "My nose is smaller." "It is. But you've also had less time." Theo appeared to find this logical. He sat up properly and looked around the restaurant with the alert interest of someone who has arrived at a party and is assessing the refreshments. "Can I have bread?" he asked Nadia. Say hi first. Theo looked at Daniel. Hi. Hi, Daniel said. Can I have bread? Daniel slid the bread basket across the table. Theo took a piece and ate it with the focused seriousness of someone completing an important assignment. Then, he looked at Daniel again. What's your name? Daniel. Daniel, Theo repeated, testing the shape of it. Do you know how trucks work? Daniel glanced at Nadia. She had her elbow on the table and her chin in her hand, and she was watching them with an expression he could not read but felt, across the table, like warmth from a lamp. I know some things about trucks, Daniel said. This turned out to be enough. Theo launched into a 17-minute explanation of the differences between dump trucks, cement trucks, and what he called the big flat ones, which after some collaborative narrowing down, turned out to be flatbed trucks, during which he ate 2 more pieces of bread and one of the dinner rolls that Daniel had not touched. Daniel asked clarifying questions. Theo answered them with the authority of a subject matter expert who is slightly offended to be questioned but will allow it. Nadia did not say a word, she just watched. 9. They stayed until 9:47. This was not planned. The restaurant had started to thin out around them, the candles burning lower on the tables, the kitchen noise going quieter. The waiter came by a third time with the check printed, and set it down in a way that was technically neutral, but unmistakably a signal, and Daniel picked it up before Nadia could reach for it, and she did the thing people do where they protest, and he did the thing people do where he didn't let the protest land, and they moved past it in about 9 seconds, which is the correct amount of time for that particular exchange. Theo had given up on trucks by this point, and was sitting quietly, leaning against Nadia, not asleep, but in that half-gravity state children occupy after a certain hour, where they are technically present, but no longer operating at full capacity. He had Daniel's pen. Daniel had offered it as a distraction at some point, and now it was just Theo's pen, and he was drawing something on a napkin with the concentrated silence of someone who knows what they're making and does not need your input. Can I ask you something? Nadia said. Yeah. When I walked in. With him. She glanced at Theo. What did you think? Daniel was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it right. I thought you were not what I expected. In a good way, or in the way of a good surprise. A real one, not the kind that just feels good for a second. He paused. The kind you're still thinking about the next day. Theo held up his napkin. On it, in the wavy lines of a 4-year-old's drawing, was something that might have been a truck, might have been a building, might have been a large rectangle with some circles underneath it. It's a truck, Theo announced. I can see that, Daniel said. You can have it. Theo held the napkin out across the table. His face was very serious. This was a transaction with weight to it. Daniel took it with both hands. Thank you, he said. I'm going to keep this. Theo looked satisfied. He settled back against Nadia's arm and closed his eyes. Within approximately 90 seconds he was asleep again. Nadia looked at Daniel holding the napkin. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. 10. The parking lot at 11:14 p.m. This is where it ended, and also where it started. She had the boy over her shoulder again, back to the comma position, back to the weight of him distributed across her body like she had been engineered to carry it, which in a way she had been, through 3 years of practice, and before that, the kind of life that teaches you how to carry things. She had his shoes in her coat pocket. Both of them this time. Daniel walked beside her to the car. He was not sure why. She had not asked him, and she clearly did not need him, and he understood that. But he walked beside her because he wanted to, and because the walk was short, and he was not ready for the short walk to end. At the car he stood there while she opened the back door and settled Theo into the car seat, with the same economy of motion as before. The buckles, the straps, the smoothing of the hair, all of it done in under 90 seconds in the dark of a parking lot. He offered to hold her keys. She had already unlocked the car. He offered to hold Theo while she got the car seat ready. Theo was already in the car seat. He offered, and this is where it got fully absurd, to help with the buckles. She looked at him over her shoulder. The buckles are done. Right. He stood in the parking lot at 11:14 at night, realizing that he was a man who had been completely unnecessary this entire evening. He had fetched one shoe, he had let her have the breadbasket, he had held a napkin with a truck drawing on it. He had listened, he had talked about soil. These were not heroics. These were not the things you do to make an impression. They were just being there, being in the same space, not making it worse. He had somehow never understood before that not making it worse was its own kind of thing. She closed the car door softly, turned around. They stood a few feet apart in the lot, under a light that was doing its best against the dark. "Same time next week?" she said. She said it like it was a simple thing, like it was the obvious next line. He said yes, before the sentence had finished leaving her mouth. Not quickly, not desperately, just immediately. The way you say yes to something when the answer was never in question. She nodded. She got in the car. She drove away. Daniel stood in the parking lot for a little while after the car was gone. He was still holding the napkin. 11. Here is what Daniel did not know that night in the parking lot, standing under the light with a truck drawing in his hand. He did not know that the sitter canceling had not been the only reason Nadia almost didn't go. The second reason, the bigger one, the one she had not said out loud to him or to Reshma or to herself in so many words, was that she was afraid. Not of Daniel specifically, not of the date or the restaurant or any particular outcome. She was afraid in the general, pervasive way of someone who has been very hurt by someone they trusted and has rebuilt, painstakingly, over years, a version of their life that does not require trusting anyone new. The life she had built was good. It was small and full and hers and Theo's. It did not have gaps that announced themselves. But it was a life assembled specifically to not need anything from anyone else, which is a kind of architecture that works right up until the moment you want something it cannot provide. She had sat in her car in the restaurant parking lot for 4 minutes before going in. Theo had been asleep since the corner of Maple and Fifth. She had driven with one hand on the wheel and one eye on him in the rearview mirror the whole way, which is also how she drove through life generally, half on the road, half watching him, checking. She had sat in the car and thought, "This is foolish. This is a Tuesday. I am tired. He will be perfectly nice and perfectly wrong, and I will drive home at 10 o'clock having spent 3 hours on something that is not Theo, and not work, and not sleep, which are the 3 things that are in actual short supply." She had almost put the car in reverse. Then Theo had stirred in the back seat, and she had looked at him in the rearview mirror, and she had thought, and she would have died before saying this out loud, she had thought, "I am doing this for him too." Not in the way parents say it when they mean themselves. In the actual literal way, she was doing it because he deserved to grow up watching her try. Not just survive, try. She got out of the car. She carried him across the parking lot. His shoe fell off at the door. She walked in. Daniel also did not know this. When he asked, "Does his dad ever take him?" that question, the wrong question, the one asked through a door he didn't know was there. Nadia had felt the old familiar pull, the pull toward the wall she was good at building, fast and high, the one that goes up in the seconds after something lands wrong and gives you a place to stand while you figure out if you are safe. She had started to build it, and then he said, "That must have made you very good at this." And she stopped. Not because the words were magic. Words are rarely magic on their own. But because of what they did not do. They did not apologize for the question. They did not explain themselves. They did not look at her with that specific pity that she had learned to identify in under a second, the pity that people aim at single mothers like a flashlight, well-meaning and blinding. They just looked at her and said something true. She had not been looked at like that in a very long time, in the way of being seen and not pitied, in the way of being seen and not managed. Just seen, whole, as the person doing the thing rather than the person to whom the hard thing had happened. She thought about it the whole drive home. She thought about it while she carried Theo inside and took off his one remaining shoe and put him in bed. She thought about it while she stood in the kitchen drinking water in the dark, because she was not ready to turn a light on and go through the ordinary motions of a night that had been anything but ordinary. She thought, he fetched the shoe. She thought, he asked about the aquifer. She thought, He held the napkin with both hands. She stood in her kitchen in the dark for a while. Then she thought, same time next week, 12. They went back the next Tuesday. The sitter did not cancel this time. Nadia showed up at 7:02, coat collar correctly situated, belt properly threaded, without a sleeping child over her shoulder. Daniel was already there, back to the wall, eyes on the door, water in front of him. She looked at the water. You're not a drinker. I drink sometimes. You ordered water last time too. I was nervous last time. She sat down. She ordered wine. She looked at him. Are you nervous now? He thought about it. No. Good. She picked up the menu. He picked up the menu. They were at a table that was not a corner booth, because the corner booth was taken, and this felt like a different kind of evening, more exposed, in the middle of the room, visible. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them cared. Theo asked about you, she said over the menu. Yeah? He asked if the man with the big nose was coming to dinner again. She did not look up from the menu. I said maybe. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What did he say to that? He said okay. Then he asked if you knew how cement mixers worked. I can look it up. She lowered the menu. She looked at him across the table. Not the calibration look. Not the recalibration look. Something different. Something that had no name yet, because it was too new. The way feelings sometimes are too new to have names. Still forming. Still deciding what they are going to be. You don't have to, she said. I want to. She looked at him for a long second. Then she looked back at the menu. I'll have the pasta again, she said. I'll have the fish. You had the fish last time. It was good fish, she laughed. Not the small rationed laugh of someone who is being careful. A real one. The kind that takes the room by surprise, including the person doing it. Daniel sat across the table from her and thought, there it is. He did not say this out loud. He was a quiet man. But he thought it, and he filed it away in whatever place people file the things they want to remember, the things that belong to them. There it is. The waiter came. They ordered. The evening went on. Later, much later, when it was not too new to say out loud, Nadia would tell people that the first thing she noticed about Daniel was that he went back for the shoe. Just that. Not the things people usually list. Not the way he looked. Not the way he talked. Not the charm or the story or the feeling of a first impression carefully managed. The shoe, because going back for the shoe meant he had looked at her life, the whole messy, breathing, unglamorous weight of it, and his first instinct was not to comment on it or manage it or feel sorry about it. His first instinct was to help, small help, the specific kind, the kind that cost you 4 minutes in a parking lot and nothing else. She would tell people this, and they would nod and think they understood, and they mostly did not understand. You only understand it if you have been the person at the door, carrying the thing you carry, waiting to find out what the person at the table is going to do with the fact of you. Most people do something. They react. They assess. They adjust their face. Daniel asked what she usually ordered, which is the same as saying, I'm not going anywhere, which is the same as saying, this is fine, which is the same as saying, you walked in through the door, and I'm glad you walked in through the door, and I do not need you to be different than you are. That is not a small thing. It is actually the whole thing. The napkin truck drawing stayed on Daniel's refrigerator for 11 months. The night Theo first walked through Daniel's apartment door, on purpose, during daylight, shoes on both feet, he saw it on the refrigerator and looked at it and said, that's mine. I know, Daniel said. You gave it to me. Theo looked at the drawing for a long time, with the evaluating seriousness that 4-year-olds bring to their own work. It's a good truck, he said. It's a great truck, Daniel said. He meant it. He kept the drawing on the refrigerator for a long time after that. Some things you don't take down.